I wanted to ask you though, Scott, just while we're talking Champions League, because I heard you on another podcast about this. We've got the situation now where we've got JDT and Buriram that have both progressed through to the knockout rounds at the expense of some of the bigger clubs or from some of the bigger countries in East Asia. Clubs that play almost predominantly foreign teams. I think there's one local player. Generally speaking, there's usually one local player in each of their 11s, which is far removed from what we've known the Champions League to be in the past. That's had the 3+1 rule. Now we've just got open slather. You can do what you want. Have we gone too far in the other direction? And what could be the implications further down the line if we just allow this to happen for teams to field entirely foreign teams? Is it actually good for Malaysian and Thai football? I mean, these clubs dominate their domestic scene anyway. On paper, you go, it's great for Malaysian football. They've got a team through. But is it actually great for Malaysian football?
No, of course it's not, because it's not a Malaysian football team. It's a collection of, but this is the same thing with with whatever the Premier League in England that I've long argued should no longer be named after historic locations where they may have once had ties to, and they should instead be given animal nicknames or whatever, because these teams from Manchester are not got any connection outside of the fact that they happen to live there to these teams. So I think I think we're maybe at the beginning now of what could be some kind of a seismic change in Asian football, because I think it's clear that we're not going to turn back from what's happening at Champions League level. That we're not going to go back to the 3+1 or whatever we had before. There's some skepticism about why this was originally done, with the influence of the Saudi clubs who had opened up visa spots and could field 11 players. Obviously, that we've seen it now. Yeah, with JDT and Buriram, we've seen clubs trying to do it with the ill-advisedly named Lion City Sailors and other clubs where you're almost coming up with a and in a way we've seen it mirrored in other regions. In the OFC, what's happening with the Champions League now, where you've basically got one kind of superpower club that's developing in Fiji and one superpower club in Vanuatu, and they're effectively the national team that have gone into the OFC Pro League as well. So we're seeing it around the world. So my great concern, as someone who's been here in Japan for a long time, and obviously from Australia, where I think both our countries have strong traditions of producing young players coming through and helping the national team, I think the bigger impact that we're going to see is that the more and more nations that get left behind is that they simply fall in step with the continental regulations and go. What we've seen in Europe, the problems that we've seen, where these clubs are fielding all foreigners and no national team players, and then you're struggling to produce players. My fear is that we'll be here in 3, 4, 5, however many years' time, and we're talking about the J League is running with 8 foreign players. We're talking about the A League is running with 10 foreign players, and then we're talking huge impacts with national team and development, because. And again, we see the regulations have shifted so often in terms of which nations and which clubs are allowed to participate, right? So at the moment, we have it kind of with this closed shop as it is. But just say, for example, Vietnam, but just plucking an example out of there. If they come up then with the one kind of super club model as well, and the next time we see, entry requirements in this for the Champions League, reordered or whatever, then we have the Vietnamese super clubs coming in. Then we end up with a Chinese super club or a Laotian super club, where investment is coming in, and you've got all these foreigners, or in other nations, all the national team players are coming, whatever it is, and then you can almost see a situation where even nations such as Japan, that consistently produce so many good young players, will struggle to compete with them. We've seen the Korean clubs struggle to compete as it is. Again, the domestic leagues are operating under what looks like an increasingly model that's about to be outdated of limited foreign players being able to play in the domestic competition. I know the J League technically now has this thing where you can sign as many as you want, but you can only play a certain amount on match days, and they're changing from this year. And I can see that as being the first step towards the J League in 2-3 seasons going, we'll go to 5, we'll go to 7, we'll go to 9, we'll have no regulations. And then once we see that, for me, we're standing on the tipping point now of this being the reality with domestic leagues across Asia, where everyone will just follow in line, and then your domestic leagues are in a world of hurt.
But even Scott, I think in the countries where you don't have that relaxation of those rules, um, the direction of travel with the naturalization for national teams is almost bringing that in through the back door as well. You look at Thailand, you look at Indonesia. Um, Malaysia is maybe not the best example to use given what's been happening there over the last sort of few months, but there is a direction of travel on that even with the national teams, that you're naturalizing players or you're desperately scrambling around to try and find players who have germs of ancestry somewhere in their backstory, and then bringing those players in. But generally speaking, they're not players who have been developed locally through the local system. So the national team is no longer a reflection of the local system that produces players. And then those players that get that eligibility at some point or another, and we've seen it especially with the likes of the Philippines, end up then moving away from the European countries that have produced them, and they end up playing, say, in Southeast Asian countries or in the Philippines. And so it's almost reverse engineering the whole thing, and it's a big issue. I totally agree with you.
It would be an absolute tragedy, I think, if someone like the J League, who's been a flag bearer for development in Japan, because you'll have a couple of clubs that will hold out and want to play Japanese, but you'll end up with 3/4 of the clubs in the first two divisions playing Brazilians, and that will be the reality we go, and that impacts absolutely everything. And for my opinion, the Champions League changes are to blame for the point that we are going to get to, and I think now we're almost rolling too far down the hill to turn it back, and I think that's what happened in Australian context. Can be very interesting. Do we remove the salary cap? I think that's the only way that this will go, because otherwise a nation like Australia will become an absolute irrelevant in any form of continental championships that struggle to compete in a third tier competition if you're limiting cap and limiting visa spots. So you're just going to be rolling down this hill that will then impact every layer of the game, where we will get down to nations 20 to 40 on the rankings having exclusively foreign leagues, and I think as a
But look, we even saw last year's Champions League final. In some respects, was the perfect example of those two systems clashing against each other. You had Kamabaki Frontale with the vast majority of their players domestically produced, coming through with the Frontale Academy or other academies in the J League, and then coming through, maybe going overseas and then coming back to play in Japan against an Al Ahly team that was almost exclusively foreign born, foreign produced, and then bought in. So we've already got that to a degree. And it'll be interesting to see if we end up with the Champions League actually playing to conclusion this year, whether we see that replicated or not again this season.